This is kind of like why I love working on startups because like the challenge of actually making something work in the real world is kind of where it gets spicy. I mean, like me in my room, like doing math on a notepad, like is not helping anybody. Like it's fun for me, but I almost need to like consciously avoid having too much fun.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Big Thoughts, Little Talks. In this episode, I talk with my good friend Pavel. Pavel and I met at a previous startup where we both worked, and we discovered a mutual passion for freestyle rapping, and may or may not have had freestyle rap battles during walks on our breaks. Pavel is currently the CEO of AppSell Automation, a company that develops machine learning and optimization solutions for the manufacturing industry. In this episode, we talk about why he deactivated his Facebook, muse about startups, and take a deep dive into one of his side projects to use combinatorial optimization to help with COVID testing. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Pavel.
All right, 1, 2, 3. All right.
That was that was like a physics problem of relativity. It's like, how do you know that our claps are synchronized? And the truth is, you can't.
Yeah, post-production.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the key. So you deleted your Facebook yesterday.
I didn't delete it. I deactivated it. They want me to come crawling back. That's the way their system is designed. So if you log in again, then everything's back to normal. So I need to have that self control. So it's just an experiment for me right now. I haven't like broadcast to all my friends that I've done it. I think because if I fail at it, I don't want to be lampooned mercilessly. So I deactivated it. I want to like just try a week or two just to see what the difference is. You and I have talked a little bit about how it just doesn't really feel like the first place you want to go for either like sharing things with your friends or posting content or whatever. And I think like maybe part of it is like it doesn't feel like a much of a close knit community. Like it feels like I'm Facebook friends with a number of people who I'm not sure I'm like necessarily close friends with, in the sense that we like talk once a month or something. So
yeah, Facebook is growing to be kind of a confusing platform for me too. Just like I've heard of so many people who do things like what you've done, deactivated their accounts like permanently or for a long period of time. I've heard people who go through in their friends list and they just unfollow every single person manually so that their newsfeed is just empty. And it's like it seems like there's so many workarounds to try to fix this service to serve them better. But yeah, I guess did you have, so I've deactivated my Facebook a couple times in the past too. And I'm curious, did you have like something that triggered you to do this? Like, did you have a defining moment where you're like, all right, I'm going to do this now?
Yeah, I think like coronavirus is amplifying a lot of things that already existed. Like we're in a situation now where we get everything digitally, like our socialization and conversations and news. I mean, obviously we always got digitally, but it just definitely made me realize how much time I was spending on it, and also like the relatively low quality of like just information that you can get. I mean, I think like coronavirus, it was hard for anyone to have really high quality information about it because there was so much uncertainty. And I think in general, reporting isn't very like science centric. But I would say like even my most intelligent friends, like who I, really put the time in to like write thoughtful things, they were either super wrong about what would happen, or they ended up basically promoting things which were later debunked as conspiracy theories, or just like that had no basis. And
This was
so,
on Facebook that you saw these?
yeah, on Facebook. So I definitely started thinking about like, where am I getting my news sources from? And I've kind of been I've been reading a ton about propaganda recently. I've been reading like a number of books, which have been really interesting. And Facebook as a platform just seems like, I just think it's like a platform for everyone to promote some version of the world that I'm not sure they even buy into fully themselves. Like it's just like a make believe land. And I think like as an early internet user, growing up with the internet, like you kind of are raised to know that the internet isn't real, and like no one was on like AOL chat rooms and like expecting like super high quality content or like kindness from strangers. And I feel like Facebook like tricked people somehow into thinking that this is some kind of like, I don't know, like safe or high quality community or something. So anyway, I also, this is semi related. I also unsubscribed from the New York Times. uh,
Whoa.
yeah, I know. I feel like I'm making a false equivalence here. Obviously,
Yeah.
like they're not the same, but also, okay, I didn't technically unsubscribe. I like tried to unsubscribe, and then they were like, "Oh, do you want to use our service for like 20% of the cost?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever."
Wait,
I
they
wasn't
do
really-
that?
Yeah, they do. Just to like clarify my position there, it was because I just thought that I think like there's a lot of really like impressive and talented and self-sacrificing journalists who are doing an incredible job of finding like truth and reporting it to the public. But I didn't appreciate how prominently they featured the opinion section and basically what felt like a lot of unsubstantiated cultural commentary that I absolutely did not resonate with. And that felt very narrow-minded. Um, and also just like the sensationalism with which I feel like they're approaching news at this point. I mean, there's still very, very high quality journalism on there, and like obviously, it's more of a trusted source than Facebook. Like, I really don't mean to be equating those two at all. Um, but like, just in the coronavirus, like, this is a very pretentious reference, but the news always feels a little bit like the shadows on the wall of Plato's cave or something. It's like there's like the real thing, and then there's like the representation of the thing. I appreciate the pressures that journalists are under in terms of like turning out stories on like a quick turnaround, whatever. But I think like there's this new objective that's been introduced in the digital age, which is like the page views and the clicks and the traffic that's driven. And like if you follow those metrics, like you're going to follow those metrics off a cliff. Like everyone's critiquing Facebook and tech companies for basically like driving adoption at all costs or retention at all costs and coming up with all these like psychological tricks. But like when I open the New York Times and there's like three headlines that are like freezers full of dead bodies, like piling up, like decomposing corpses, destruction, like coronavirus, like Armageddon, whatever. Like it's kind of the same thing. It's like, all right, you guys lost me. Like, it's too sensational.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. So I'm curious. Well, I guess best of luck with your Facebook detox. You
thanks.
have you found any other sources of information that you found to be more high quality?
I'm kind of going through the process now. I almost like, every time someone like deletes their Facebook, they're like, big announcement, Facebook community, like I will no longer be part of this platform. And I was always like, that's so cheesy. It's like you're demonstrating your need for the platform on the platform you're trying to leave or whatever. And so I was like, I'll start my own long form essay, like mailing lists. But then, that stuff is hard. Like the whole point of Facebook is you can like scribble off whatever, like I'm listening to this song and like it doesn't matter. Nobody has an expectation of quality. And so like obviously it's harder to turn out quality content. I've been thinking about all of the things that have kept me on it and all of the things that I really dislike about it because I want to explicitize it. I think like Facebook keeps so many users because it feels so silly. And like even talking about it now feels so silly. Like we're like grown men with like, jobs and like whatever. Like why are we talking about this digital platform? And honestly, like if you just look quantitatively at the numbers, like people's engagement is insane. My engagement was insane. Like if you use these apps that time your usage for different websites and whatever, it's like, I mean, I was consistently logging, like I don't even want to admit like how much, but and I'm not sure if it was like Facebook specifically or just like general phone activity, but like I was easily using my phone like 4 or 5 hours a day. And like I know a lot of that was idling. And so I think like people think it's like not significant enough to take seriously, but like I mean, it's your time wasting away. I always have this image of like being on my deathbed and just like wondering like, oh man, like what hours could I have spent differently or whatever. Like maybe this is a little
Checking your
too like,
Facebook on your deathbed and like, oh
yeah. Yeah, like, oh, I should have talked to this person before I
man.
got here, whatever.
No, I definitely resonate with that. I think it might have to do with personality too, but I found that it's very difficult for me to sort of have a healthy relationship with social media like Facebook if I don't put guards in place. So my current
Right.
setup actually is pretty good. So I just removed it from my phone. That was like by far the largest thing. So removed Facebook from my phone, and then I have this friend DK who made these two Chrome extensions called Intention and Hide Newsfeed.
Mm,
And so one of them, it does what it does is hides the newsfeed. So when you go on Facebook,
right.
you don't see anything. You only can see like notifications and things like that.
Is that the one with the inspirational quotes on the news feed?
Yeah, I think you can. It doesn't. It has like nice photos, and then you can set an intention.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah, I use one of those also.
yeah, and then the other one is sort of like a timer, like one of the ones you mentioned. But it
Hmm.
tells you like every day how many minutes of your quota you've spent, and
Hmm.
you have to unlock it for a period of time. So you have to say, okay, I want to use this like Facebook for 5 minutes, and then you
Hmm.
click the button, and then it lets you use it for 5 minutes. And
Nice.
it kind of feels like it's kind of insane how many yeah, like how much structure I need to like make sure I just don't go crazy. But
Right.
I was doing the same thing as you. Like it's so easy to spend 3-4 hours on it, and
Mhm.
especially with so much coronavirus news and people posting, it's easy to
Right.
lose track of time.
And I think like there's so many reasons why it's addictive, but like sometimes there are hits. Like sometimes a friend will like share something that's really well thought through and like really thought provoking, or it'll just be something that's like meaningful or that you wouldn't have like found out about otherwise. But it's just like the signal to noise ratio is like just outrageously low. And I didn't like I just never found that I was intentionally spending time. It would be like I'm taking a break from work, I'll just like flip through my phone or like whatever. Um, and it feels so casual, like it feels like you just don't have to think about it. But then like the hours pile up.
Yeah. Um, what else have you been thinking about during this pandemic? Like how have you been uh, coping with it? How have you been reacting to it?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny you should ask. I think I think everyone's responding in their own way, and I think like everybody wants to be really helpful. And unfortunately, like I think just the truth is that most people can't unless you're a infectious disease specialist or a biologist or whatever. I mean, there's all these like DIY ventilator things, but I think this crisis is highlighting a number of things. Um, I guess like the brittleness of different kinds of supply chains, like the specialization of labor, like the fact that we can't just all like like take up shovels and start like fighting coronavirus or something. Like there is so much specialization that everyone does, even though everyone wants to be helpful. So I think a lot of folks are focusing on like connecting resources to where they're needed or donations or whatever. My like personal horse in the race, and also I think like people want to help, but they're not going to like change the next 12 months of their lives. Like how much can you really do in a week or so? It's like volunteering for a food bank instead of getting into homeless policy or something. It's like a big
Yeah,
discrepancy there in terms of what you
I
can
would
do.
say like there are like those are the most direct ones, but I think there are also a lot of the soft intangibles of like supporting your neighbors, supporting your family, like
Right.
because yeah, there's so many second order, third order effects. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So what's your horse in the race?
Yeah, my personal, project has been an area of professional expertise I have that is applicable to this area is just in general combinatorial optimization. So it's basically like matching complex subsets of resources to where they're needed. As you know, obviously, I work a lot in like maximizing throughput of robotic assets and biolabs. And so, as it pertains to coronavirus, I've been spending some time with a friend of mine, a friend and a colleague of mine who we've been exploring a product idea. We know that there's been a test shortage for coronavirus, and so we've kind of been breaking down like what does that test shortage actually means. Like, is it just that there's a bottleneck of like the plastic swabs needed to take samples? Is it that the bottleneck is at the machines that are actually used to process the samples via PCR? Is it like a reagent thing? Whatever. Is it like the labor that's needed to like literally handle and like load the machines, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically, what we figured out, there's a substantial body of research around the topic of group testing. And what group testing is it basically says if you have n individuals that you're trying to test in a population, it doesn't take n tests. There's a number of ways to do it such that you can use like a logarithmic number of tests or even fewer. The absolute simplest one, let's say you only have like n over 5 tests, and this is what the state of, I think, like Alabama or something, one of the southern ones, started experimenting with. You literally just put like 5 people per test, and then if any of them are positive, like if the test comes back positive, you know that at least one person was testing positive, or the test is a false positive. That's like a whole another thing. Like just ignore that for now. You know that at least one person was positive, and so you can just assume that all 5 are. And so if you have a relatively low incidence of infection in a population, this is one really cheap way to increase basically the amount of people that you can test, the amount of patients you can test. But it turns out you can do a lot better than that. And so the most effective, I can get into a lot of technical detail with this, but it's kind of been a pleasure to like learn some of the math background. There's a whole field called error correcting codes, which is basically constructing these test groups such that individuals are part of multiple test pools. And when you get the overall results back from all the test pools, you can kind of like back out who's infected and who's not. And this is like the study of deterministically figuring that out. And there's also probabilistic methods, and there's also adaptive versus non-adaptive methods where you have one round of testing or you have successive rounds of testing that can use the previous rounds as information. But all that's to say, this has been an interesting intellectual puzzle, and I'm really interested in these kinds of things. I think that there's actually no software packages that I know of. Certainly no recent ones. There's one that's pretty old at this point, and I'm not sure it has that much stuff in it. There's no software packages out for doing this, and so if some states did want to basically make this trade-off between number of tests versus like slightly higher logistical complexity of adding more individuals per test, which takes some coordination, and probably it's really difficult to do unless you have automated liquid handling robots and things like that. We just basically wanted to put a resource out there so that people had access to it, so they wouldn't have to work through the math again. But I'm sure that a lot of people are having a similar idea to ours.
Yeah,
But
I'm curious to distill that idea a little bit more to
Mhm.
make sure I understand it. So I'll try to rephrase it. So I think the initial example you said was the base example. If you don't have enough tests, you have like 100 people. Say
Mhm.
you can group those. You have only 20 tests, so you just group people in groups of 5,
Mhm.
and then you give those 20 tests. And then if you, so what happens if? So I guess if it's negative, then you know that all those people don't have
Right.
coronavirus.
That's right.
If they're positive, then you know that one of them does. Then would you have to administer a test to each of those people in the group?
You could, if you wanted to do, if you absolutely had to know like exactly each individual who had it definitively, um, then you could take that positive result and then do a second layer where actually like every one of those 5 individuals um, then takes an individual test. And to be clear, if this is like a nasal swab, you just like dunk all 5 of those nasal swabs in the reagents used for the test or something. Obviously, those people like have nothing to do with each other.
Right, not sharing this nasal swab.
Yeah. We're not talking about spreading coronavirus here. Exactly.
If only
So
one of them had it, then all 5 of them would have it afterwards.
exactly. Basically, the impetus behind all this is like the quarantine that we have right now is like a 100% quarantine. Everyone is staying at home. Nobody's allowed to go out. But if we were, and there's a number of economists who have looked into this and basically saying like testing every single member of the American population like once a week is by a factor of, don't quote me on this part, but like by a factor of like 100 to 1,000 times more cost efficient than continuing the quarantine for like a year or something like that. So it would cost like many billions of dollars, but it's by far the best economic outcome. And so if you can get frequent testing at a high enough test volume, then basically people can selectively quarantine. Like if you're at risk, you quarantine until you're cleared from a test, basically. So this is efficient group testing is just a multiplier on how soon we can get there. And it scales like roughly logarithmically. There's like some factors, constant factors need to take in place, but rather than like for 370 million people or however many people are in the US, I think it's approximately that much. Rather than having to have 370 million tests per week, you have like a logarithm of that number. So that's a big difference.
Yeah. And so I'm going to dare venture into the actual project you're working on now. So you mentioned that. So the difference is that you actually have overlapping groups. So you have people that may be tested twice, and that somehow deterministically you can figure out who's infected that way. Like,
That's right. There's
could you explain, like maybe with like a small example, how that might work, or is that?
It would be extremely difficult to do it verbally in full complexity, but I'll just tell you, I'll highlight a couple different approaches towards this for the technically minded listeners out there. You can either do it probabilistically or deterministically, in the sense of like you can either use like Bayesian statistics or you can use just like direct discrete optimization. So in the case of and also depending on your tolerance for like false positive and false negative rates, you can also get increasing or decreasing efficiency. When I say efficiency, I just mean like number of people per like test compression. Like it would have taken n tests, but now it takes however many tests, t tests, where t is less than n. And so yeah, there's basically two steps to performing group testing. There's the testing design, where you basically map like which patients will be part of what test pool.
Mhm.
And then there's the decoding step, which is when you get all the results back, you get the result of every single test, positive or negative or 1 or 0, whatever. Then at that point, you have to back out or decode the result into individuals, or basically into form a plausible interpretation of what individuals being positive or negative would result in this final output. And there's multiple ways to do that. And this is where you get into trade-offs between false positives, false negatives, which, basically like you can be very conservative. And for example, when you're dividing, when every test pool is 5 individuals, you can be very conservative and say, well, if the result is positive, then just assume all 5 are positive. You can basically say that, but then you get a bunch of false positives. Um, or, for example, it might be very important that if there's even one person who's negative, you definitely don't want to miss them because that would be catastrophic. And so you optimize for false negatives. But anyway, but the discrete optimization method, it's pretty cool. There's this one problem. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it's basically like in medieval times when standards of ethics are lower, this king has this party, or maybe it's a high-powered queen. I don't know. I don't know how feminist they were back then. But anyway, and there's 1,000 guests to the party, and the tradition is that each guest brings the king or queen a bottle of wine. And we know that exactly one of them is poisoned. So one of them has some terrible poison. Whoever drinks it is going to die. But so thankfully for us, the king also has 10 prisoners who he is planning on executing anyway. So they might as well like taste some wine for poison first before they get killed.
Oof.
And so the question is, using these 10 prisoners, how can you test 1,000 bottles of wine to determine the one that is poisoned? And so on first glance, you think, oh, it's impossible. How could 10 people drink 1,000 bottles of wine and figure it out? But what you realize is that if you split the wine into different groupings and have each prisoner taste basically combinations of multiple groups, you can uniquely figure it out. And this is basically a generalization of binary splitting. So if you have 10 prisoners, 2 to the 10 is 1024, which is more than 1,000. And so you basically split those 1,000 bottles into divided groups such that they're minimally overlapping. So let's
So
say,
how does the 2 to the 10 um, map? Like how does that number? Like what's the significance of that value?
yeah, that's a great question. Um, so this is the part where it's very difficult to visualize just verbally. But if here, I'm gonna bring in a prop. I'm gonna bring in a notepad.
On mixed media.
So, oh
Oh
no,
no.
what am I doing?
Yeah, if you hold it in front of your body, I think it works.
It's gonna edit me out. Okay, I'm gonna draw it ahead of time, and then I'll just show it.
Okay.
So if you have a pool of 1,000 people, which I'm just gonna recognize or notate by this rectangle,
Okay.
the question is basically, or sorry, 1,000 bottles. The question is how to split these 1,000 bottles such that there are 10 testers. So basically, there's 10 test pools. Uh,
That sample every one of the bottles.
right. Actually, let me start by explaining it another way that I think is going to be a little simpler. Um, if you have ever counted in binary, um, you know that you can count to 1,024 using just the digits of your hand. So if a finger is down, it's 0, and if a finger is up, it's 1. And my fingers are disappearing, so whatever. I'll hold it in front of my body. So this is okay. So 0, 1, and then actually this is hard to whatever. Okay, here 0,
Is
1,
this just
2,
a long way to
4,
look me up?
4 people, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. Um, So basically, you see that with just 10 digits, you can represent 1024 values. And similarly, with 10 prisoners, where with the prisoners being alive or dead is them being up or down, you can actually represent 1024 values for wine.
I see.
So um, basically, knowing which bottles each prisoner has drank and then seeing which ones died, you can back out from there which is the one that was poisoned.
So like the hard part is figuring out what combinations, and how many combinations of the bottles do you actually need to be able to determine which bottle is the poison?
Right. So it's 10 different test pools because there's 10 different prisoners. So here again, you can see that there's two parts to the problem. One is the test matrix design. So basically, which prisoner gets which bottles, like which samples are in which test pools. And then there's the decoding step, which is the second part, which is based on the results we observed, how do we then figure out which individual bottle it was? And the point is that if let's say 4 of the prisoners die, there's exactly one bottle that was drunk by all 4 of those. And so the only one that appeared in all 4 test groups is the one that must have the poison in it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. That was a super helpful analogy, even though a bit dark, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks to everyone who's still listening until this point.
Cool. So I guess what else are you working on these days? So I know you've been self-employed for a while now. Like, do you have yeah, like what are your plans with your business, and do you have any other ventures that you're looking to start?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely always searching for interesting things to work on. What I've been working on through my company so far, if I didn't lose our listeners with the group testing so far, they're gonna love this next segment on
Yeah,
industrial
actually,
optimism.
you can give it like a brief intro of what you do, what's your company, and
Yeah, my company, Apps Automation, it's been focused primarily on eliminating resource bottlenecks for manufacturing processes. We have so far focused on the synthetic biology space substantially, and worked with a number of clients that have basically large robotic facilities where the goal is to run as many experiments as possible through the available resources. So if there's like 10 different kinds of machines that all process different steps of a biology experiment, like a PCR machine or a liquid handling system or et cetera, uh, figuring out at what time to utilize those resources such that the overall amount of time it takes to run experiments is minimized.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
curious how, yeah, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected your business as like a self-employed bootstrap company?
I actually just finished up one huge project that really predated coronavirus, so it kind of remains to be seen. I think people are a little bit more open to conversations right now, from what I can tell, because I don't know, maybe folks are just stuck at home looking for something to do. But in terms of sales, it's hard to say. I typically work on pretty big projects, so the sales cycle there is always long. It's not like I have like a daily indicator or something that shifts a lot. But yeah, in general, I think I've always been very countercultural, against the man, whatever, and so like raising VC funding was definitely something that I preferred not to do because I don't know, maybe like I think at this point, like it was like I was kind of like more young and naive, but you see a lot of kind of frothy startups where you kind of wonder, man, how do these people get money and think they're working anything great? And it's definitely frustrating to see companies like raise a bunch of money then never really find product market fit. I just figured I'd do it the opposite way. I just would find the product market fit first and then just get money to scale it up. And I still think that's a good way to do it. So, but then the flip side is that what you're doing takes a lot longer. Like it takes a lot longer to test a hypothesis if you don't have a bunch of money to kind of speed it along.
Yeah. So that's something that you're looking to transition into right now?
Yeah, I think you have to take your metrics pretty seriously in terms of like how long it takes you to accomplish stuff and like not like just working as hard as you possibly can and burning out like crazy. So I'm still very excited about a lot of the industrial optimization work I've been doing, but I'm always looking for new ideas. So now that I'm kind of like between major projects, I'm kind of wondering what direction to go with that.
Yeah. Do you feel like your life has changed before and after the the pandemic?
I would say I've always been happy to spend a lot of time by myself thinking hard about stuff. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that psychologically I'm feeling the pressure that some people are feeling. Like I'm pretty happy to like sit at home with my books and read for weeks. So less so there. I mean, obviously, I've been affected. My partner's dad was in the hospital for coronavirus in New York. He's elderly. He's recovered now,
Oh,
thankfully.
it's good to hear.
So we've definitely been affected. It's definitely stressful in that kind of sense, but um, I don't know. I mean, it's both like interesting that globally everything is framed in terms of the pandemic now, but also like I haven't found it to be incredibly affecting. I mean, I don't know. I'm really lucky that I've had some savings from the jobs I've been doing, so it's not like an immediate financial concern or something like that. I'm sure if it went on for a year or something, that'd be another situation. But I think it's just a good opportunity. I mean, obviously, I don't want to sound callous. Like, there's a lot of people facing difficulties. A lot of people with like family members who are at risk, and obviously have that firsthand experience. But I don't know. I always appreciated an opportunity to sit back and just reflect and catch up on reading and have a bit of like kind of a creative introspection period. So trying to treat it that way.
Nice.
How have you been handling the pandemic?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty similar attitude. I'm also in a pretty fortunate position with still being able to work from home and have a job. Um, yeah, I think that I'm just trying to take the attitude as well of making the most of the opportunity. Like starting this
Mhm.
podcast and doing some other projects, like just uh, yeah, I think that the more time that we have, like now that there are no social commitments, there's no um, even the sort of like the routines of going to the gym or commuting.
Mhm.
There's a lot more time in the day, and I think that's it was definitely harder in the beginning. I think for me to get situated and oriented. A lot of that was like Facebook and the news as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, I I also sort of feel that I feel like there should be a word for this, like the guilt that you feel of saying that like I'm doing pretty well and like I'm actually enjoying the
Right.
pandemic.
Survivor guilt, I think, in general.
What is it?
I think it's survivor guilt. Like if you're part of if you're part of a plane crash and like 99% of people die, but you're like the one of three people who survived, then you feel really bad. It's like a
Oh, interesting.
you wonder why you were spared rather than others. It might be a little bit different in the context in which it's like a global scale thing, but
Yeah, maybe like a softer version of that.
right.
But yeah, and I
Sure.
think that um, yeah, I feel that the people that are fortunate enough, then we should like I think it's really awesome that you're working on that project on the side. Um, like the ones that are fortunate enough to have the mental
Mhm.
cycles and the financial stability to be able
Right.
to step up and do projects and try to do your part, I think
Mhm.
is super noble.
Yeah, I think the one part I wanted to mention about this kinds of projects that I didn't get to before is like I think it's great to have like the like trying to help. It's just great to have the drive to try to help society and try to be productive towards it. I think it highlights the difficulty of actually like there's so much. This is kind of like why I love working on startups because like the challenge of actually making something work in the real world is kind of where it gets spicy. I mean, like me in my room, like doing math on a notepad, like is not helping anybody. Like it's fun for me, but I almost need to like consciously avoid having too much fun because then it's like not affecting anything. It's like actually getting in touch with like these diagnostics labs or actually getting in touch with people who are administering these tests or involved with that the administration of those tests and understanding what the real challenges are because you do a little bit more research and you realize that like when people say a test shortage they really mean like there's like one reagent that's missing and their lab just like can't get a hold of it or like other tests are available but the hospitals have a contractual obligation to use only like Quest Diagnostics or something like their local facility is full or something and so the real world is just like much more messy and it's kind of like where some of the excitement comes in. Like I think I'm definitely very allergic to like technologists trying to solve everything in like a data science Jupyter notebook or something. So that's interesting.
Cool. I guess so to wrap up, how can people at home, listeners, how can they support you, or do you want to give any uh, pitches for any of your projects or anything like that?
How can people support me? If you guys are still listening to the podcast at this point in time, I'm incredibly impressed, and I would probably enjoy being your friend. And I recently deactivated Facebook, so
Yeah, but how should people reach you?
I'm at a loss for friends, internet friends. People can email me at pavelmkanov@gmail.com, or they can check out my website, abseil.ai, abseil.ai. Email is the best thing. Yeah, you were talking about like what alternative content to set up. I think like there's some really high quality newsletters I've been enjoying. Um, I think I want to just like start like subscribing to like feeds of my friends like medium to long form essay or something. Like I feel like there's going to be a movement towards that. Like whatever replaces Facebook is going to like keep a lot of the something will replace Facebook and I think it's going to be something more in that vein. But more on that the next time you
Yeah,
interview
yeah,
me.
yeah. I actually discovered Substack.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I
Right.
was actually looking into that. I think that'd be a pretty cool thing to start writing in. So, we can subscribe to each other's Substacks and
Awesome.
like
That would
each
be
other's
wonderful.
posts, and it'll become the new Facebook.
This is so lame, but like I was browsing LinkedIn and just thinking like, like everything on LinkedIn is incredibly lame and I would never recommend like sitting around and reading it, but it's like everything people post, they actually really get behind. Like they're putting themselves in a professional context and like saying something, which means like they're actually thought about it and they actually tried to be fair about it. Um like I don't know, sometimes like you meet people in a professional context and they're like, totally like impressive and whatever. And like you're in a more informal context and you almost wish like they would just like go back to the professionalism because like the personal quirks start coming out and you're like, I guess there's like a business standard for a reason, you know what I mean? Like I guess there's a certain level of like respectfulness and thoughtfulness and whatever, but maybe it's like too mentally draining to be like engaged in that all the time. So Anyway, but like when the LinkedIn quality started being like higher quality than Facebook, I was like, man, we've really hit rock bottom. Like, so anyway.
All right. Well, thank you, Pavel, for agreeing to come on the show and talk with me.
Absolutely.
And listeners at this point now are enlightened about the dangers of social media and combinatorial optimization. So thanks for
Absolutely.
discussing.
I'm glad that there's an audience supposedly out there that's interested in those topics. Please get in touch with me if you are.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot, Peter.
All right. Thanks.